Hello everybody, hope you're all well, and this is our second lesson on population revision, gearing you up for the fact that after the summer months you'll be in a position where you're having a go at some A-level style examinations in terms of mock exams, and so as well as the change in place topic which you've been doing more recently, some population revision will also be very helpful for you in terms of pulling those different ideas and strands together. Okay, so I would recommend that you've got pen and paper at the ready, because as I say, with this being a revision activity, there's the opportunity for you to structure your notes in a certain given way. Okay, so what we will do, we will go into screen sharing. So we can go into today's PowerPoint information, which we will do now. And we'll head into our PowerPoint. Just get rid of self from the corner of your screen, and we will go into the PowerPoint slide share now. Okay, so here we go. So this is about part 2 in terms of population and the environment, and there's a lot to cover through this particular section. And you can see that this section, part 2, is the principles of population ecology. Okay, population ecology and their application to human populations. So we're going to look at population growth dynamics, the things that result in the population changing. We're going to also study the concepts of overpopulation, underpopulation, and optimum population. We also need to consider the implications of population size and structure for the balance between population and resources. This sits at the heart of the whole topic, the idea that too many people, this concept of too many people always relates to the concept of whether there's enough resources or not. And carrying capacity, ecological footprint, and their implications are also discussed as well. You'll also know from the stuff you've done in the past that there's the PRP model, the population, resources and pollution model, which considers positive and negative feedback. And then two very much contrasting views on population. You've got the negative perspective from Malthus, the Malthusian and Neo-Malthusians, and then the alternatives from Boesrup and Simon. And we need to consider the prospects for the global population and the projected distributions of population in the future. So the first thing for you to do is to draw out this table and to try to fill in the blanks. And I'd encourage you in a moment to pause the screen so that you can have a go at this. So you can see here the largest population in an area is capable of supporting the long term, where you'd write what the term down is. And for some of them, the terms are there, and we'd encourage you to try and write down the definitions. So you might want to make the boxes big enough so that you can actually have a go at writing what you think the terms are. And what you think the definitions are, but also for you to actually write the correct definition in a few moments' time. So if you pause your screen now and have a go at that, and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, so you can see on here, carrying capacity is the largest population an area is capable of supporting, the carrying capacity. The ecological footprint is a measure of an individual's impact on the environment. So that is calculated through the amount of productive land required to produce the goods and services that are being used. Population ecology, so this term here that we mentioned at the start, population ecology is the relationship between population growth and the environmental factors. The environmental factors such as climate, soil, geology, the topography, the shape of the land, all have an impact upon the ability to sustain a population of a certain size. So these things influence the carrying capacity. Your optimum population is the ideal number of people in an area, and that is where all resources are being used to give the highest economic return. So you've got some parts of the world where they are underpopulated, such as Canada. It's viewed that if Canada had a slightly bigger population, it could become wealthier because it could use its resources more effectively. But by the same token, you've got the likes of Bangladesh, where clearly there's a situation where they are overpopulated. And at the bottom there, a negative feedback loop, an opposing force. So that counters any change, lessening it and holding the system in a more stable equilibrium. So what we're going to encourage you to do is to create a mind map based on this particular section of the topic on population ecology. So this might be if you've got an A4 book in front of you in terms of exercise book, that you use a double page spread, or that you use a piece of A4 or A3 paper rather. And turn it landscape. We'd recommend that you get a selection of coloured pens and highlighters. Start at the centre, as demonstrated on our example in the middle of the screen, with an unframed image about 5 to 10 centimetres high. And you make the branches closer to the centre thicker, as demonstrated on here, like the branches on a tree, and then they narrow out and become smaller as you go into the finer detail. So you branch these thinner lines off to hold supporting data and information. Use images wherever possible, and the colour coding is also helpful in terms of developing these ideas. So the ideas for your main branches are population growth dynamics, population resources, the PRP model, the views of Thomas Malthus, and then the views of Esther Boserup and her followers, and then population futures. So they can be your branches, and it won't surprise you to hear that the upcoming slides that we're going to go through focus on the content for those sections. So probably going to take you, 5 or 10 minutes to create that structure. If you want to pause the video whilst you do that, then you'll be in the position for us to proceed. Growth dynamics. Now, this is a study of how and why population sizes and structures change over time. And of course, population growth is determined by birth rates and by death rates. But actually, the growth can also be limited by the environmental resistance or environmental factors. So if there's a favourable climate, it's going to promote a bigger population. Soils, if they're thin and poor, it might only support a small population. The geology, the rock types is going to have an influence, and the shape of the landscape, the topography. Now, there's 3 key population dynamics that we've already mentioned. So you've got overpopulation, so too high for the available resources at the existing levels of technology. Those final 4 words are really important, the existing levels of technology, because it could be, and this was the case, in places such as Mauritius. Mauritius could only support a fairly small population until they developed the technology to de-rock the island. So they actually removed most of the rocky landscape and turned it over into fertile land. And so therefore, it wasn't overpopulated anymore. Underpopulation, if the population declines or is too low, there are too few people to use the available resources to their full potential at the existing levels of technology, those words again. And then optimum population is the ideal number of people in an area, and this is where all resources are used to give the highest economic return per person and therefore the highest standard of living. Now, in terms of 2 other key terms as well, in terms of population and resources, the carrying capacity is the largest population that an area is capable of sustaining and supporting in the long term. And that's going to depend on the population size, and it's going to depend on the rate of resource consumption. We know, of course, that in different countries, Earth overshoot day occurs at different points. So the carrying capacity is not a fixed term, it's fluid, it's ever changing according to the place concerned. The ecological footprint is a way of measuring the environmental impact that we have, and it calculates the amount of productive land required to produce the goods and services that are being used. Now, this is calculated in GHA, global hectares, and that's the amount of land of average productivity that is required for this purpose. Now, we do know that ecological footprints are increasing across the world. We do know that with globalization, of course, we bring things in from different countries, different parts of the world in terms of food products, but also in terms of the other things and resources that we consume. And we do know that at current rates of consumption, we're using the equivalent of 1.6 Earths. So we're already in a state of overshoot because the consumption of resources is exceeding the Earth's long-term carrying capacity. Now, this ties in perfectly to the PRP model because we do know that populations acquire the resources from their surrounding environment. So we might get fish from the sea, for instance, or a river. We might mine the land for minerals and resources. And these resources, these raw materials, are used in particular over the last 200 years by humans to generate electricity, or they're manufactured into finished products which are used to meet the demands of the population. Now, this process can, unfortunately, have the negative consequence of polluting the land, polluting the water, polluting the atmosphere. And if that pollution contaminates a variety of these mediums, so for instance, acid rain can have an impact on the water and the land, then it results in something called cross-media contamination. Now, positive and negative feedback on the PRP model either enhances or counters the changes that occur within a system. So positive feedback enhances or amplifies that change, makes it even bigger. But the negative feedback is an opposing force. So it counters any change, it lessens it, it holds the system in a more stable equilibrium. So, two very different, very much opposing views. You can see them fighting it out here in the middle here with the boxing gloves. So here's the Reverend Thomas Malthus on the left, and there is the Danish economist Esther Boserup on the right. Now, Malthus, as a pessimist, believes that overpopulation is an inevitable consequence of society, because basically what he has argued is that food supply increases arithmetically. It goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, but the population increases geometrically, and this doubles every 25 years. And this leads to the population outstripping food supply, causing what he termed, he named it after himself, a Malthusian catastrophe. Now, he says, therefore, the Earth has very much a fixed carrying capacity. And his view is that balance can only be achieved by positive checks. So positive checks doesn't sound very positive, but he says the positive checks are war, famine, disease, abortion, preventative checks. He didn't refer to abortion really at the time. This is more the neo-Malthusians who still subscribe to his views at a later point. He talked about celibacy and later marriage. In terms of people not marrying to a later point and reducing the number of children. Because, of course, in his time era, typically children were not born out of wedlock, whereas modern society, of course, is very, very different to in Malthus's times. Now, Esther Boserup is an optimist. She believes in the power of human innovation and that we can use technological advances to allow food production to keep up with population growth. Her famous saying was, necessity is the mother of invention. When we have to find a way, we do. The carrying capacity, she's saying, could be altered, and that technology can increase the number of resources available so the carrying capacity can maintain itself. We can't increase the amount of land in the world, but we can increase the amount of productive land. So the example of Mauritius before, of derocking, was a great demonstration of this. So what supporting evidence exists for each view? Well, for Malthus, the supporting evidence is that famine, disease and war are apparent in sub-Saharan Africa. And equally, the fact that the UN predicts that by 2050, 4.2 billion people, sadly worldwide, will be under water stress, where water is difficult to acquire. The UN also suggests that 800 million people worldwide are malnourished, and that 2 billion people face food insecurity. This demonstrates really that actually, there's a number of views that support Malthus that we are already reaching a point of carrying capacity which will have negative impacts on the planet. Now, there are limitations to his viewpoints, of course, his views are of the time in which he wrote. We can't criticise him for not knowing that technology would exist to change things, such as the Green Revolution. But actually, technology has advanced considerably, and the world's population is far, far higher now than Malthus would ever have expected. So what about Esther Boserup? Well, her views were that examples such as the Green Revolution and the development of high-yield variety seeds, that are resistant to pests, the use of fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides would grow more food, the fact that we can use water control and mechanization to increase crop yields. You've got more recent examples, such as drip feed irrigation, hydroponic systems, where actually we don't even need the amount of soil that we used to have. Biotechnology and the development of genetically modified crops is another example. And also the European Union developed something called the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe, which intensified farming on a big scale and produced huge amounts of food. But there are limitations. So the fact is that soil quality in sub-Saharan Sahel does limit food growth. And there is apparent overgrazing of land, reducing the fertility of the soil. And we also know as well that deforestation, as people try and acquire more resources, is accelerating soil erosion, leading to desertification. So what about the population futures? Well, in 2016, the global population reached 7.4 billion. So 4 years ago, 7.4 billion. And it's predicted that by the end of this century, the world population will be 11.2 billion, which is just hard to get your head around, really. And over the course of the 21st century, world population is likely to increase by 50%. But You've got to bear in mind that the percentage change in the previous 100 years was at 400%. So global population growth rates reached a peak in the 1960s. So annual growth has continued, but at a lesser rate. So annual growth has continued to fall from 2% to 1%. In 2015, it was 1.18%. And the UN has therefore revised its estimates upwards due to the slower than anticipated fall in fertility rates in sub-Saharan Africa. There's lots of cultural reasons why those fertility rates have remained very high. And it says here between 2010 and 2012, the UN revised its estimate of fertility rates in Africa by a quarter of a child per woman. So it says per woman, it says per women. It should be per woman. And this equates to 0.6 billion more people by 2100. Nigeria is crucial to these estimates. Its current population is 175 million. It's expected to be at 900 million by 2100 as one of the most populated countries on the planet. So what about the distribution of population? Well, we do know, of course, that high-income countries are generally experiencing a low population growth, or their increase is potentially going to turn to a natural decrease. Low-income countries tend to have more rapidly growing populations. So most of the population growth between now and 2050 will be in low-income countries. And the main changes will be as follows. Now, Africa will experience the most rapid population growth between now and 2050. Its population as a continent is expected to more than double to almost 2.5 billion by 2050. We know, as I just mentioned on the previous slide, Nigeria will rise from 7th to the 3rd most populated country in the world. And Asia will make up the majority of the world's population. So, the population of Asia as a continent by 2050 will be 5.3 billion. Now, China and India are expected to remain the most populated countries in the world, but India is expected to overtake China as the most populated country. And Europe's population is actually expected to decrease, only slightly, but from 742 million in 2015 to 728 million in 2050. So we can see how, as things pan out, as you approach my sort of age in a number of years' time, we're likely to see a number of significant changes. Well, this naturally is going to have an impact on the environment and carrying capacities and our ecological footprint. So the demand for natural resources will continue to grow, and that means that more people means more resources are extracted and used. It could lead to more deforestation, more soil erosion, more pollution. And per capita consumption of resources is expected to increase as more and more economic development takes place. So population-environment relationships may change, and technological advancements may help to reduce population and mitigate climate change. So we could have renewable energies increasingly, such as wind farms. You've got, for instance, the wind farms at Thanet on the River Thames, which is the biggest in the world. HICs may share technology with low-income countries to help them to develop more sustainably. That's what we obviously hope. And education about climate change may result in more veganism. It was the most searched for term in the term's history just over Christmas in terms of veganism, with more and more people recognizing the impact that potentially lifestyles of fast food are having upon the planet. And policy changes may reduce a country's resource consumption, so there might be more public transport schemes. And regulations equally imposed by governments and global systems to reduce the consumption and the emissions, such as the Paris Climate Agreement in 2017, are likely to be ongoing. In terms of checking your knowledge, hopefully you've got lots of information there that's been helpful in pulling your ideas together, and it will stand you in good stead in terms of a good revision resource. What I'd now like you to do, please, is to go on to the Show My Homework quiz to recap on this knowledge. So we'll just come out of the PowerPoint and we will put the camera back on. And all that remains for me to say is to keep up the great work. It's been good to see people more recently face to face. And if you can keep up the fantastic work, we've only got a few more lessons left before the summer break, and you'll then be in a position where you can recharge your batteries, knowing that actually you worked really hard this year and put yourselves in a great position in terms of your performances next year. So I look forward to linking up with you all very soon.